At the TypeCon in 2011, I saw this presentation by three guys from the Language Technology Office of the Cherokee Nation in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. They were concerned about their language dying off because their younger people were not showing a great deal in learning it. And you've got to get the younger generations that are up and coming learning a language in order to carry it forward. And they thought, well, how do we make the language more interesting for the kids? What are kids interested in? And the answer was, of course, what all kids are interested in: cool stuff. And so they saw that as an avenue to making the Cherokee language and the attendant syllabary, the writing system for the Cherokee language, more attractive to younger generations. So they lobbied Apple to include one of the few fonts out there that had the syllabary in it, to put that on their various devices. And they were successful. And they ended their presentation with a plea to design fonts of the syllabary, because they said, we have so few. And at that time, they had perhaps two fonts, that worked, that were usable to them. So I asked myself, I thought, that's funny. Why don't they have a multi-weight family? And why didn't they have a whole lot of typefaces in the first place? And that just came through the history of the Cherokee Nation and the suppression by the American government that they suffered under for decades and decades, and how the speaking of their language was suppressed for so many years. And so they never really experienced an artistic development of variety in the syllabary. The Cherokee syllabary is not an alphabet. There are 85 glyphs in it, and they represent syllables. Each glyph in the Cherokee writing system can contain meaning, as opposed to, for the most part, our alphabet. Single letters in and of themselves do not contain meaning for the most part, but every glyph in the Cherokee syllabary does contain meaning. It contains meaning on a number of levels, as I found out. The syllabary itself has been a typeface very early on, right after its invention by Sequoyah of the Cherokees. One of the big questions for me to understand in some way or another, and I knew I ultimately would never have a complete understanding of it, was how is this read? And the answer to that came out of further research. All the time I was doing this, I was working on the upright version of the Cherokee's syllabary. Typographically speaking, the syllabary has no italic. There's no italic at all. As I'm going along developing these uprights, I just thought, well, let's see. The Latin script version that I pulled out of the drawer and I'm developing alongside with this, that always had an italic to it. And I just thought, well, there's never been a Cherokee italic. And so I sent an email off to them and I said, what would you think of my developing it in italic? The inspiration for which I would derive from all these manuscripts that I was looking at. And the response was very short. They said, sure, why not? But what was interesting was he sent me an image of a letter handwritten in Cherokee. And along with that was included an English translation of it. But what was really important was that he had included the letter also typed in the font that you find on the Apple devices. Suddenly I was able to make a one-to-one correlation as I went down that letter between the letter, the squiggles in the letter, and the typeface that he had used to retype the letter along with the English translation. That was my Rosetta Stone. And as I got used to how these forms changed in handwriting, I could see that there was also kind of a system inherent to that as well. And going back and forth between these forms and the forms in dozens of other manuscripts that I managed to unearth online, I saw that there was a very clear system in how they were written as well, so that in creating a cursive italic, I wouldn't just be channeling the one-off quirks of some writer in, say, 1853 or something like that, but rather I'd be basing them on forms that anyone could read who could read Cherokee. And so over the remainder of that year, I developed a cursive italic. And I got to a final first draft and I sent it off to the guys in the language technology office in Tahlequah. And they said some people really liked it, others found some of the glyphs kind of strange, but you have to understand that after people have seen the same typeface for generation after generation after generation, this is kind of a shock. And they said, I think this is a really good shock. And so I continued to develop the italic. And of course that also in the weights of the family as well. So now what we have now is a 8-font, 4-weight family in uprights and italics. After bringing Apple on board, they've also struck deals with Microsoft. There's a whole Windows interface in Cherokee now. They've struck deals with Google, so there's a Gmail interface now and a Google interface, all in Cherokee. They're bringing their language and their writing system into the digital world. And so now with Phoreus, that also sort of plays into that quite well.